All right. Okay. Okay. I think we're good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We're on.
All right. So, let's start.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So quality. What is quality? First of all, let's start from there. So quality is the degree to which your project fulfills requirements. And by project, which we discussed over and over again, project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Yeah, remember? Yeah, okay. It'll be good if we can get like feedback and involvement from each other, because there's just a few of us. So I think we can give time to whoever needs to ask questions or whoever wants to share information. So yeah, so technically projects, we need to differentiate. Business as usual. Right. So that's what a project is. So quality is about what level of the requirements or what level of meeting the requirements we're performing. So that's really what quality is. And this is what Oscar sent, and I had to go look it up. I believe this is the triple constraint model. Basically, it says quality is really the focus of the project. In a sense, when you change the scope, time, or the cost of the project, that can affect the quality. So that has quality is directly influenced by other factors. So we can go further to examine the double triangle model, and we can put in other things like client satisfaction, team satisfaction, resources, and risk. So, but I think for now we could just focus on the quality in itself. Right. So when we talk about quality, we need to know some of these guys, like Deming. Deming, if you're used to if you're used to working in a quality environment, you must be familiar with the term PDCA, which is plan, do, check, action. Yeah. So Deming is a guy who invented that whole thing. Well, I'm sure he didn't invent it, but he popularized it. So yeah, it's really talking about continuous improvements. So that's one thing to consider in quality. We've already defined quality. We are talking about other objectives, if you will, of quality. So continuous improvements is one. And according to Duran, it has to be fit for purpose or fitness for use, right? So there's a thing called Duran trilogy, which is pretty close to what we are going to learn in PMP. The process of quality is quality planning, control, and improvement. So the product must meet the customer's needs, which will in turn lead to the customer being satisfied. So that's Duran. And the next guy here, these three guys are pretty famous in terms of quality. This guy is Crosby, and Crosby focuses on conformance to requirements. So these three things, continuous improvements, fitness for use, and the conformance to requirements, are critical elements when we talk about quality in terms of PMP. So as you can see, depending on what their focus is, their emphasis is also relative to that. But Crosby went further to say that the product quality is judged by whether you built what you said you would. He actually said that there should be zero defects. The standard is zero defects. He said that, well, if you implement quality properly in a perfect world, then the cost of quality will be zero. Meaning that if you implement quality in such a perfect way, there will be zero defects. And that's where the term DERFT started, do it right the first time. So that's a big concept in terms of quality, and that talks about conformance to requirements. And the next thing which we keep on seeing is ISO. ISO is quite big in Burma as well, but most companies, I believe, use it for marketing purposes rather than to implement the quality system. But yeah, there's OSHA. If you work in the construction sector like me, that's the safety health regulations. And CISG, I believe that's for goods and services, which I'm not too familiar with. Next, we have the Six Sigma. And the Six Sigma is sort of like PDCA. They both focus on continuous improvements and also on the DERFT kind of behavior where you're trying to get zero defects. Now, when we talk about Six Sigma, the process is DMAIC or DMAIC, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, control. Well, pretty much control, and then you have the end result, which is success. But DMAIC, define is to define the system that you want to work with. Measure is you're measuring whatever your deliverables are, your raw deliverable. You analyze based on what needs to be changed, how to improve the quality further, and you improve, and then you control. You make sure that you're implementing the right amount of control. So when we talk about DMAIC, once again, we are talking about approaching the process with high levels of improvements, with reduced variances, which we will get to later on. And I think it's important to remember at least 3 Sigma and 6 Sigma, the amount of errors they allow. And if you use 6 Sigma, you are only allowed to have 3.4 errors per million. That's DPMO, defects per million opportunities, I believe. So that means that if you're making, like, say, 1 million screws, then if your screws are supposed to be, say, 3 to 5 centimeters, then you're only allowed to have about 3, which is above or below this target. So it's a very stringent quality method. In fact, I think there is a whole certification on Six Sigma, and I hear it's quite hard. So if you're interested,
I think Six Sigma is most of them are using techniques that like toe dye, using that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. But here it's I think Mikkel Harry from Motorola.
Yes.
Yeah. Toyota, I think uses the other one, which we'll get to in a while. But this is Kaizen. Kaizen, I don't know Japanese, but it's supposed to say a good change or continuous improvement.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing a trend here, continuous improvement, always looking for on ways how to improve the work, but not by large amounts, but slowly and in small amounts, improving daily on the work that you do. So that's Kaizen. And this one is the one which is kind of related to Toyota. Just in time is mostly deals with the inventory. And what it wants to do is it wants to lower the defect as usual. But the way it goes about doing that is to ensure that in your inventory, you only have the right amount of products to utilize. So that will cut out the wastages, which we have a lot in construction. And the thing with Toyota is it uses a just-in-time technique called Kanban. Yes. Kanban is the technique that Toyota uses for the just-in-time philosophy. So just-in-time, less inventory is less mistakes. When you have less things lying around the storage place, then there is a lot lesser things that can go wrong. But yeah, so the rest pretty much says it all, but I'm gonna skip that. Yeah, right, so I think this is what you might want to focus on if you're doing the exam as well. So this is Rita's. This is taken from directly from Rita's PMIisms. So if you want to focus on the knowledge of quality management, you need to know these things in the background. This is from the perspective of the PMI body. So quality means meeting requirements, not adding extra. We dealt with that gold plating in the scope knowledge area, right? Project manager must determine the metrics. We'll get to that later. The project manager must define quality management processes for the project. And project manager should recommend improvements to the performing organizations. Recommendations are welcomed by management. Quality should be checked before an active, that's I guess talking about inspection. Project manager must ensure the authorized approaches and processes are followed. That seems to be talking about QA, which we will also discuss later on. Quality should be considered when there is a change to any of the project constraints, which we will also be dealing with. One thing to remember is PMP always talks about change requests and all these approved changes. So we need to kind of keep that in mind. And the project manager must ensure that the quality standards and processes on the project are adequate to meet quality requirements. Of course, at the end of the day, quality is about requirements, and we need to provide whatever processes or products we're producing. We need to make sure that they meet the requirements in the right amount and nothing more and nothing less. So next thing, the last thing is some quality activities may be performed by a quality department. So I think if you were to answer some of the simulation exam questions, you might see this quality department or the QA department, this third party team popping up all over the place. So you need to remember that when, as a project manager, when you're dealing with quality, you do have support depending on the type. These things before, oh, it says internet connections unstable. Okay, but it's fine. All right, so let's move on to the focus of quality in modern day. And pretty much it's, as you see it, customer satisfaction. So you want to keep the customer happy, fulfill his requirements, fitness for use, right? So you can see in the picture, they're hammering a nail, but they're not using the right equipment. There should be a hammer. Conformance to requirements. Yeah, we talked about that a lot. Prevention over inspection. All right, so prevention over inspection. And if you look at the picture, you can see the dentist trying to dig a hole in your tooth. So I guess it's a case where it's better to brush your teeth than to go to the dentist. So that's that, in a sense, that's what prevention over inspection is. Prevention is about making sure that the quality defects are kept out of the process, out of the processes. So you'd prefer that over inspection, which is trying to keep the defects out of the hands of the customer. So the first one should be the priority over the second. So yeah, I think you should try to remember.
Because the prevention is before the problem.
Right, exactly.
After the problem, we need the correcting.
Right. And I think this came about from the Industrial Revolution, because products used to be inspected after they were produced. So they realized that with the cost of quality and all of those things that which we'll talk about later on, people started to realize that it's better to implement the design of quality and the quality controls into the system before you produce whatever you're producing. Continuous improvements, which we've already talked a lot about. Just in time, we also talked about Kanban, the Toyota's process, and responsibility for quality. So this one, we need to talk about, well, when we talk about quality, who is responsible for quality, right? Who's responsible for quality things? Not really, yes, he is responsible, but this is where the concepts like TQM, the total quality management, that's where they come into play. Now, the thing with quality is it has to be implemented from the top. The chairman level, or director level, or the program level has to define their policies and procedures, and then the directors need to give direction to where the process is going. The project manager only focuses on the project, the quality of the project itself, and the team manager or the team will focus on just the deliverables or whatever product you're trying to produce, right? So we need to remember that the concept of TQM, I'm sorry, I didn't include it in this slide, but when you talk about TQM, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about the responsibility for quality, and it's also addressed in ISO and all those things. They ensure that the TQM procedures and policies are there, they're present in your organization system. Right. Yeah. So quality and grade. All right. So here's a few pictures. I hope you're still hungry, Oscar. So in these pictures, you can see two types of food. Would you like to comment on the quality and grade of the food? What would you say the grade is? Okay, let me just explain. The grade off the bat, we cannot determine quality. But the grade, it's clear that the burger, the McDonald's burger, is low grade, high cholesterol, yeah, all that stuff. But it's definitely low grade, as in the ingredients put into it and the cost of it cannot be compared to the steak that you will see up there. So grade is not depending on perception; it's a fact. It's just a fact. If you look at the prices, it's there. But quality depends on what I want, right? So if this was a chicken burger and I didn't eat beef, then well, you know, the steak is bad quality for me. I can't use steak. I mean, if I'm hungry, the steak doesn't mean anything for me. But if I eat chicken and this is a chicken burger, then this is of a higher quality, right? But if I were, say, a vegan, then none of these are good quality food. I'd rather go for the Greek salad over here. So that's how grade and quality works. And also, if you want to compare cars, then you know you can also do it in terms of that. If you have like, let's say, a Chevrolet or Lexus or whatever, you can compare that to a Honda Fit. Then it's different grade. Or let's say a pickup truck, right? The grade is definitely for a crappy pickup truck. It's lower, but if I were to work on the sites, the pickup truck might be of more use for me. So it might be a higher quality depending on my demand. So that's how I differentiate quality and grade, and I think that's how I do it. So the definition of quality is a degree to which the product, yeah, we've already talked about this, meets the customer or end user's requirements or needs. And grade is a category assigned product based on the function or the technical characteristics. So that's one thing you need to remember, because the exam tends to ask the difference between quality and grade. So another way to remember it is just to think about the grade. When you think about grade, there's high grade and low grade, and you have the requirements. And when you talk about the degree to which it meets the requirements, then it can be high quality. So low grade products can be high quality products, and high grade products can be high quality as well. It's like if you were in the construction sector, it's like a low cost housing versus like, let's say, a posh condominium, right? So depending on what the government needs for the populace, we will deal with the grade. So if we deliver according to the specifications, then that's quality. So that's one way to differentiate the two. Okay, another thing here is accuracy and precision. So accuracy is about the values being closer to the targets. Now, the key word here is the target. So accuracy is about how close you can get the products to the proximity of the target itself. While precision is talking about the values being close to each other, close to themselves. So when we talk about low accuracy and low precision, over here you can see that if I were to go to a shooting range and if I were to fire a couple of shots, then I wouldn't be hitting anything here. So my accuracy is low, my precision is low. But over here, my accuracy is still low because none of the results are close to the target, but they're still close to each other. So the precision is high. If you look at the bottom, then yes, it seems highly accurate because a lot of the shots were within the vicinity of the target, but the precision is still not that good, as opposed to over here where it hits the bullseye every single time. So that's high. Oh, wait, that's supposed to say high precision. My bad. This is supposed to say high precision, not low precision. High accuracy, high precision. I guess, you know, it's only like 5 of us, so if we were to like think of like a golf swing, if anybody plays golf, this is me. So anytime I correct my swing, it just goes left and right. But if you were slicing your balls, then that will be easier to correct. So maybe Tiger Woods will be somewhere around here, high accuracy, high precision, you know, hitting those balls down the range. Yeah. Next, let's jump straight into inputs and outputs. We will have a slide dedicated to the inputs and outputs of the 3 processes, but let's just focus on the the plan quality management first, which is the first process of quality. And as the name suggests, it's in the planning stages. So what goes into the plan quality management is stuff that we already have from the previous stages, which is the project management plan, project charter, project documents, organizational OPAs, and EEFs, right? So, well, when we talk about project management plan, we need to first of all, when we talk about inputs, we're really thinking of what we can use to determine our quality management plan, to plan the quality management. But then again, I guess we have to first consider what plan quality management is. So planning quality management is really talking about how you will manage quality, well, how you will go about dealing with quality when the project starts. So what will be your definition of quality, and what level of quality you will be trying to achieve, and how you will go about trying to achieve this. It's pretty much the plan. So remember, we talked about scope and scope before. And in scope, we had like requirements coming up from the users to determine our scope. So we're going to use those requirements as well in the quality. Requirements management plan will come into play. And we need to consider the risk from the project management plan when we talk about quality, right? And then the stakeholder management plan, because when we talk about requirements, we also need to know where these requirements are, who these requirements are coming from as well. And then you'll need the scope baseline, cost baseline, schedule baseline. That's depending, that's taken straight from the triple constraint triangle, because they're all influencing the quality. The project charter is the high level description. We already know what it is. It's kind of like the mandate to start the process. So this also has a lot of the requirements as well, the success criteria, because at the end of the day, you have to validate your product for the client to accept it. And where do you look for that is in the project charter. So that's why you need to remember these two. They are also the input for a lot of the other knowledge areas as well. And in terms of project documents, your project documents could be these five, right? Now, assumption log, assumption and constraints, that's clear, right? But it's about things that you're going to be assuming will happen or will not happen. That's what assumption and constraint is. Requirements documentation is like, yeah, making the team know that's what the requirements is. And this one, requirement traceability matrix, I don't have a lot of information on this, but you need to probably go and look this up in more detail. But technically, it shows where the requirements are coming from and to follow them for implementing and verification. So if somebody were to say, change up the products, then we need to determine who else it could affect. So we need to go back and trace the requirements, and we look for those in the requirements traceability matrix. And risk register, yeah, we talked about looking at the risk management plan. So we should also look at the risk register as well to identify the risk where the quality might suffer. And the stakeholder register, which I've already stated in the stakeholder management plan. So that's what the project document is going in on. And EEFs and OPAs, they're pretty much everywhere in almost every single knowledge area as well. Inputs to all the knowledge areas pretty much. EEFs is really regulations from the government or your company, which you have to, it's not an option, it's not a choice. You just have to implement it. OPAs, then they're policies, and you do have a choice, but it's suggested that you still use them, right? So the outputs produced are the quality management plan, of course, because we're dealing with the plan quality management. Quality metrics, yeah, so we'll get to that. Quality management plan, first of all, as I said, it's what it determines the quality. It determines what quality is, the level of quality delivered, and it talks about how to analyze the products, increase the efficiency, reduce defects, save money, etc., etc. So that's what quality management plan is. For quality metrics, it tells you how you're measuring the products. So if we are, let's say, because when we talk about quality, we need to talk about what we're measuring as well to determine if it's a good quality or a bad quality. So that's what quality metrics is. For example, in the case of the food scenario we talked about a while ago, if we were to say compare calories, we could have compared calories, we could have compared the prices or the ingredients, the amount of ingredients that goes into it, the amount of nutrition we get from it. So those will form the quality metrics, right? And then the project management plan and document updates. Yeah, it's pretty much after you finish planning the quality, then you're going to have to update your project management plan, and because you're updating your quality management plan and probably your risk management plan, depending on where this goes, because it's really like it's a reiterative process where you have to keep going back to these plans and changing things. So that's where you update the management plan. And the document update, yeah, you could have lessons learned and all that. So you will also have to update that as well. So an example here is if extra quality management work is required, current work is reflected in the scope baseline. Yeah, so you may need to update your scope baselines, your requirement traceability matrices, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just talking about the inputs and outputs of the plant quality management itself. And the next stage is we have the other two, which is manage quality and control quality in the quality process. As we said, the plant quality management takes place in the planning process, and the manage quality and control quality takes place during the executing / the monitoring and control process. I say / because this can happen simultaneously, right? So the next important thing is that it can be kind of confusing, these three areas. So this should be used to differentiate how you decide which process you're in. So when we talk about the plan, obviously we're talking about planning. So this is about looking ahead. This is before shit gets planned, let's say. When we talk about managed quality, we're talking about executing. So I think the confusion could lie more between managed quality and control quality. So let's talk further about what they're about, right? When we talk about the, first of all, the plant quality, it's, as we said, how you define quality and how you will achieve it. When we talk about managed quality, it's about the work done. It's not focused on the product. What focuses on the end product, the end result, is the control quality, because it's about examining the actual deliverables, the end result of what
managed quality is just only focused on the process.
Exactly. That used to be quality assurance in PMP 5. Yeah. But the thing is, the reason why they changed it is managed quality is really quality assurance plus other things such as the design, implementation of quality, and continuous improvement of quality. So I guess PMP decided to upgrade their quality assurance into managed quality, because what you just said was that the process used to be deals with the assurance part. When you focus on the process or what your team is doing, how they're doing things according to the procedure or policy, you're really focusing on the process. When you talk about control quality, you don't care about how they do stuff. You just want to know if the end result meets the criteria, the acceptance criteria or your quality metrics. Right. So, you can ask these questions. So if you have to ask like, are we following the processes? Then that's the managed quality or plan assurance, if you will, quality assurance. But remember, the exam uses the word managed quality. You just need to remember that. If it helps you to remember it as quality assurance, which it helps me to do, then you can do it like that. But just at the end of the day, remember the PMI no longer calls it quality assurance, right? So will quality objectives be met? We're not talking about the product here, we're talking about the process. When we talk about the product, what we talk about is, will the products meet the quality standards, or are there variances? Is it within the limits that are acceptable, tolerance limits? You know, that's how you differentiate the three of these things. So let's go on to the quality management process. Right. This is kind of it's a bit strange, but this is in Rita. Rita shows the processes, the steps, and the first step for me, it's really scope management. It's coming from scope management, but you're stopping at where the scope gets defined, right? Let's say the scope gets defined, right? So you have the requirements from the customer, and the requirements are clarified by the team using the processes, you know, brainstorming, all those things on that, and then we define scope. What happens next is we try to develop this quality management plan here. And how we develop this quality management plan is to, remember, implement our standards, policy, procedures, which will take input from the quality departments, which we said we have, and the EEFs and OPA, right? And we have the scope. And that produces the quality management with the additional metrics and so on. So with that, we move on to execution because we already have a plan. So when we move on to the execution stage, we have the execution. And with the execution, okay, you can already see the three processes inside. And then after you produce your stuff, you can't call it a day because the results have to be analyzed and verified if it's according to schedule, if it's according to the quality standards, if it's according to the client's requirements, etc. So you need to verify these deliverables. And if things didn't go according to plan, at least you will have learned lessons. So it's not a lost cause. You know not to do certain things again, and etc. Right? And lessons learned go into the OPA, and the verified deliverables means that the work will be completed and customer will have accepted. And this is verified deliverables. Validated deliverables, we don't talk about in quality currently because I didn't see it much. So I think that will come under the scope management. So moving on, right, what you were saying is we could also have the change requests if things didn't go according to plan. And we need to make sure it goes into the integrated change control, and the change control board has to decide. And if we need adjustment, we will adjust it, and then it goes back into the execution, managing quality control. So I hope I've kind of clarified this chart here, because when I saw it, it seemed kind of confusing. I had to take a moment to, yeah. But okay, so that's clear, right? Okay, moving on. Don't worry, we're already on page 12, and there are only 30 slides in the presentation, so it's pretty tight. Yeah. So once again, we're going to talk about the process, but we're going to talk about the whole three of the processes, as opposed to just the plant quality management that we talked about in the earlier parts of the presentation. So as we said, plant quality management, we've already done this. We have project charter coming in, project management plan, project documents, and your OP and EEF is what exists in your company. And what you get out of that is the quality management plan and the metrics or the project documents updated. But the major aspect of that is the metrics. So what we'll do with these is we will reuse them in the other processes. So they automatically become an input to manage quality and control quality. And don't forget your OP and EEF, which is in the background somewhere, right? But when I say you're going to use them back as your inputs, you might not be using just a quality management plan. You might have to go back to using the entire project management plan, because as we said, other factors which affect quality are in the project management plan, the other knowledge areas. You might be using that. And when you update the process, you're not only updating the project document, you're not only updating the metrics, but you will be updating the documents, like where we said lessons learned and all that. So you need to remember that. And when we talk about control quality, the first thing we'll be looking at is the deliverables. And that's what your team is doing on the ground. to check. This is like raw data. So that's the work performance data. So these are also the inputs to the control quality process. And when you have the deliverables and work, when you see this, then this is just the initial stage. You will get your deliverables verified, and the work performance data will initially become information. But it has to be processed by what? By the control quality process. So the deliverables become verified, and the work performance information comes out of the data. But before that happens, you need to send the reports to the managed quality, and the quality control measurements, which you took from the ground, has to go into managed quality, and then the reports will come out. And these are the reports which we'll send back to the stakeholders, which you will find somewhere in these documents and plans on how to communicate reports to them. And then you go back to the control quality to tell these guys if they're doing crap or if things are going according to plan, etc. So this is almost complete. The cycle is almost complete. And if you look at this, you can already see a lot of inputs and outputs between the three processes. And remember, you have change requests. And because in a perfect world, we might not have change requests, but unfortunately, we're always going to have defects on projects, so we may need to change things up. And another thing to remember, according to the PMI-ism, is that when you have changes, you need to once again re-inspect these changes, because the exam might ask you these things as well. So don't forget to implement the approved changes in the control quality in your work again. And that's pretty much every single input and output of the quality processes. So instead of looking at the boring tables that PMP 6 guidebook has, I think this is a much simpler way to remember the different documentation that goes into it and that comes out of it. Right. So yeah, as I was saying, this is the boring process that we normally. Oh, you want to go back? Yeah, go ahead.
So the managed quality always happen in our intern, right?
Yeah.
And then we need to check with the quality audit inspection.
Yes.
You need to start before the delivery for the control quality.
Right.
And then you are going to the quality control quality. We need to check with the related stakeholder.
Right.
This is also include the not in a certain criteria. We need to check with the validate scope.
Right.
Yes. And then after the validate scope, customer and stuff, we are delivering with the closing last time.
Okay, but yes, here's the thing. If you're like me, I tend to confuse the scope and quality most of the time.
Yeah.
And the verified deliverable and validate deliverable, stuff like that, it can be kind of confusing. But when you talk about validating the deliverable, I think you're beyond the quality process. Yeah, that's one thing you need to differentiate. I think you should probably go back again and look at that, because I had to remember that so many times because I kept getting it wrong even after reading notes. So try not to mistake the two. Right. Yeah. So so this is we've already seen this. We can see that if we look at the inputs and outputs, we've already covered every single one of them pretty much. So project charter, project management plan, this is plan quality management, EEF, OPA. What comes out is quality management plan, metrics, blah, blah, blah. And here, so you can see that every single input and output to this process is over here. Only difference is this is so boring to look at and it's hard to decipher. And it's good to have this picture, and that way you don't need to memorize anything. I don't think the exam will ask you things from memory. I mean, things should be like, you should be able to arrive at the answer just by thinking about it, but not by memory. So please try not to memorize any of these. And then we'll be moving on to tools and techniques as well. But even the tools and techniques, you don't need to memorize the different tools and techniques. There are methods to differentiate them. You just need to know what each tool and technique does, and then you should be able to tell if it belongs to the plan quality, managed quality, or control quality. Please excuse me, he has to use the toilet. Yeah. Oh, there's 4 of us. All right, let's continue. Okay. So, tools and techniques. Tools and techniques, we're going to talk about the analysis part first, or the decision making. When you're analyzing, you're analyzing different things on the project to arrive at a solution, pretty much. So these are the different analysis, I don't know what you call it, the plural of analysis that we use on the project. So let's talk about cost benefit analysis. This is used in the project management plan. And the cost benefit analysis is used to analyze the benefits versus the cost. Now, if you want to get into more detail, this is where you decide if you spend like $1, how much benefit or how much quality are you getting back for the amount of money that you've spent? So that's what cost versus benefit analysis. And I guess you can also think of it as like a variance analysis as well, but nah, let's just call it cost benefit analysis. So cost benefit analysis is that you're weighing whatever you're spending money on. In this case, it's time, but we're talking about quality. So we're going to weigh our quality against the money that we spent. Multi-criteria decision analysis is where we prioritize. So we have our prioritization metrics, and it's about numerically assessing options based on important criteria. How we should do a group decision on where the criteria comes out, and then we will prioritize the more important ones, and we will probably discard the least important criteria. So document analysis is really just looking up the documents like tests and reports to see what's up, you know, to ensure our quality is being confirmed. And this is used in managed quality. Yeah, because if you look at the definition, and if you remember the chart that we talked about, then this shouldn't be so hard to determine which process group they belong to. I'm sorry, I kind of forgot some of these terms because I just did my Prince 2, so it's confusing sometimes. But one thing I found interesting is Prince 2 doesn't really care about activities. It's all about products. It's mostly about focus on products. And I guess that's what makes PMP kind of special. Oh, you're back, yeah. So yeah, so this is good because PMP, we care about the activities as well. It's not all about the end product. Because at the end of the day, in order to produce the product, you have to use the right processes and you have to monitor the processes. So that's good. And alternative analysis is, as you can see in the picture, trying to think of different options on how to approach the problem, which way to go, left, right, or, you know, yeah. And process analysis is using lessons learned on previous processes to improve. So, for example, in construction, when we let's say build our building, the first and second floors tend to have a longer schedule because that's when we're trying to learn the process, using new systems like Paw Tun, whatever, which we're not used to. But once you get the hang of it, once you learn from your mistakes or whatever, your process, once you analyze it very well, on the third, fourth, fifth floors, it should be much faster. So that's how you do our schedules and projects anyway. So yeah. So that's process analysis, and root cause analysis is to seek or identify a process, a procedure, and policy which requires readjustment. So technically, you have a plant where you have the roots. If you cut out all the causes of the problem, all these causes of the problem, then you no longer have the problem. All right. Yeah. So I guess if the problem was like chikungunya, what causes chikungunya? Maybe contact with people who have chikungunya, or maybe getting bitten by mosquito, or living in Burma. If we were to cut these three out, yeah, so that won't happen anymore. So that's what root cause analysis is. And then, okay, we're going to talk about some of the tools and techniques. One thing to remember is not to memorize. I'm going to restate it again. Don't memorize it. Just know what the tools and what the tools do, and then you should be able to remember which process you should use it under. So tools and techniques, we'll talk about brainstorming, which we all know what brainstorming is. Brainstorming is like you have everybody at the table, theoretically. Yeah, right. So if there were other people here, we will sit and we'll make we'll combine the ideas, collect the ideas, and then we'll talk about how to best achieve the quality on a project. So it's a pretty basic method of collecting data. That's why it's used in plant quality management. Nominal group techniques focuses on prioritization, as we talked about. It's really about thinking of things which will, each of us will think of something that will affect the quality of the project, and we will vote on what might weigh more in the decision in the decision making of the quality. So yeah, we need to vote and prioritize, and the lower priorities get eliminated. We don't need to think about those. And we need to focus on the higher priorities, and that's what nominal group techniques is. Think of it as like just voting, pretty much. Benchmarking, we talked about already in the earlier management knowledge areas. Benchmarking is looking at like more accomplished companies in your industries. But one thing to remember, it can also be looking at other projects within your companies as well. So if you have let's say, if you have a problem X, you've never done with X, you've never dealt with it before, but you know of somebody who's done X, you might want to look at what he's doing, where he's going, if it's good, or you might want to, set that as your benchmark, pretty much.
So I think maybe benchmarking like you're using the compared to one another.
Yeah, it's definitely comparison. Benchmarking is pretty much comparison. You're right. That's all it is. You're comparing companies with other companies or within your company. That's one thing we need to remember, because when we talk about benchmarking, we forget to think of within our company. So if you're comparing projects within your company as well, that's still benchmarking. Logical data model, I am not quite sure what it means, but technically it's about the relationship of the entities and attributes. I don't really see this question that much either, but yeah, so I hope that's that. So we are now joined by another member.
Hi guys, thanks for waiting. I tried to make it, but a bit late, sorry.
That's all right, we forgive you. We're just happy you came. Glad you could join us.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's 3 of us now. So, all right. Now we're going to talk about mind mapping. Mind mapping, it says several ideas which can be further developed into branches. Yes, branches. We're about to put in 3 diagrams, but in case it's not there, I'm sure it's not there. But you need to remember, tree diagrams are kind of like mind mapping as well, where you have the different branches coming from different ideas. So even if you look at the picture, you can see the cost, dollar, how do we save money? And there might be option 1, 2, 3, or time, there might be 1, 2, 3, right? So let's, and that can be branched further into other areas. So force field analysis is when we have 2 opposing options, and then 2 opposing viewpoints. So you will have, let's say you're implementing a system in your company, maybe like BIM or I don't know, something like that. There might be people who are in favor of it, and there will be people who are against it. And force field analysis will weigh who is for and who's against, and weigh the opinions against each other. And let's read what it says. It's a method for listing and evaluating the forces. But yeah, that's pretty much what it says. Right. So another area, we're still in the plant quality management, but I think we need to talk in more detail about the cost of quality. When we talk about the cost of quality, we have the conformance and non-conformance costs. Because according to Crosby, their quality cost is like 0. There's 0 cost of quality, because once you implement the perfect quality system, there is no cost. But we don't, just because he says that, who are we to believe in? I mean, so we need to weigh the cost of conformance against the cost of non-conformance. So what is the cost of conformance? It's cost of assurance and cost of prevention. So prevention, we talked about, we favor the prevention over inspection, right? Prevention over cure. Yeah, and cost of assurance. Assurance, we talked about quality assurance as well, but another way to remember assurance is this: confidence. When you're assured, you're confident. Like, for example, Zini is assured that he will be definitely passing the exam before the end of this year. So that's assurance in itself, right? And the prevention is, of course, to study hard to make sure that you don't fail. You're preventing failure, in a sense, yeah. So cost of non-conformance could be the cost of appraisal, which could be inspection, to ensure that it doesn't fail. And cost of failure, yeah, which is kind of expensive if we're talking about PMI. No, actually, it's cheaper the second time around. But anyway, I'm just making a joke. Don't mind. Yeah, failure cost. So that's what cost of conformance and cost of non-conformance is. And of course, cost of conformance, you can think of it as the cost of good quality, and non-conformance is the cost of poor quality. So in a way, one is in a positive sense, that's why it's green, and one is negative, that's probably why it's red. So that's a good way to remember. Right? All right, so now we've moved on to manage quality. The rest of these are really tools and techniques, because we've already dealt with all the inputs and outputs. So when we talk about tools and techniques of managed quality, we have the checklist. Yes, so everybody knows. You have it written out and you're just going around to check to ensure that they're being implemented, which is different from check sheets, which we will deal with later, right? So the next thing we have is a design for X. Design for X is, as it says, X, you can pick up an experiment, but it's kind of like what you're doing. But in terms of X, when you're considering the quality, when you're manufacturing or designing quality, you are thinking of different variables, and you're going to experiment with these different variables to see how the quality affects, how the cost and quality affects each other. So when we talk about these variables, it could stand for different features, such as manufacturing, design for manufacture, right? It could be easily manufactured, or assemble, install, like precast, for example, is very easy to install. So we might be designing for that. Design for assembly as well, that's one of the assembly. And I think there is like IKEA products where you can just like shelves, where you can just buy off the shelf and you can assemble them by yourself in like 5-10 minutes just by looking at online instructions, as opposed to having to go for the hammers and drills. And so that's the areas that you want to experiment to see which will produce the highest level of quality, highest level of customer satisfaction. Because that goes beyond quality in a sense, right? And then we'll talk about affinity diagrams. Affinity diagrams is like when you have a lot of ideas and you need to group them, usually made with, So we're going to talk about, like in the brainstorming session, everybody's going to be talking about a lot of things, a lot of ideas. We might be going from category to category, but at the end of the day, we need to in order to make an informed decision, we need to group them back into their respective categories. And that's why when you do the affinity diagrams, you tend to write the ideas on post-it notes so that you can categorize them easily after the session. The matrix diagrams is really like a table. So it could be a spreadsheet as well, and it helps you analyze the complex relationships. So you can look at the relationships, the dependent, independent variables, how they relate to each other. Is it large, small, medium? So that's what you're doing. It's used to analyze. And you can use it to sort and identify critical quality requirements. And inspection, I think everybody knows what inspection is. And it's also known as audits or walkthroughs. From what I know, audit and inspection should be kind of different. But according to PMI, I think they can be mentioned in the same light. For me, audit focuses more on the process aspect, whether your team is following the policies and procedures. And inspection is more of an on-ground thing where you're looking at the end results. But according to PMI, what's going on? of your chance. Shall I be looking at that? Oh, okay. Yes, please go ahead. It says I have a question. Should I be typing or? If you have a question, please go ahead. You can use a microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Brother. This regarding with the cost of quality, you mentioned appraisal cost belongs to the cost of non-conformance, right? But actually, it is. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, the cost of appraisal belongs to the cost of non-conformance, right? You mentioned, but actually, it belongs to the. As I know, it belongs to the cost of conformance. It's assess the quality. It's to assess the quality, right?
Right.
In order to prevent. So
right.
I think this statement is something wrong.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Can somebody confirm that, please?
I think cost of quality divided into cost of non-performance and cost of performance, right?
Right.
Inspection, everything is under cost of performance. That's why.
Oh, okay. So so it seems that you're right. It seems that cost of appraisal, inspection, and detection should be under the conformance.
Conformance, right? Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
So that we carry out these activities to make sure that the product is in conformity to the original requirement. That's why it's under cost of performance. That's what I remember, if I remember correctly.
Let me check. I will. Yeah. Let me just try and clarify before we make a. Let's see. According to the guidebook here, but let me look it up further before I say anything. 318, 119. Yeah. It's in cost of conformance. You're right. Yeah. Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes, you're correct. It should be in the cost of conformance.
Cost of conformance. Yes. Thank you.
As you can see here. Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah. It says it should be in the appraisal cost.
Oh yeah. I got it.
Okay. Yeah. But it's clear.
Don't worry, but it's good. It's good. This is a good discussion.
Yeah. Because we need that. I just chopped this up from all over the place. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it seems right to me at the time. So that's why. But I'm glad that somebody pointed out that it's wrong. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.
Yes. Okay. All right. So we talked about inspection and meeting. Meeting is about pretty much helping the team come together. Everybody knows what meeting is. Yeah. But one thing is that we tend to kind of take meeting for granted, and meeting, as simple as it sounds, we should consider meeting whenever we're talking about issues or conflicts, right? So you might get a question which deals with issues or conflicts, and then in that aspect, you may need to consider meeting. You may need to think of giving meeting a chance, right? All right. So statistical sampling. Statistical sampling is where you look at the representative sample, or where you have a collective group, because when we do testing and so on, it's not easy, or even inspecting, auditing for that matter. It's not realistic to, when we have a big project and we have a lot of end results being produced, when we're manufacturing and we have a lot of products being produced, we need to select a handful of the products to test. So when we talk about statistical sampling, that topic deals with how to select the sample. So it may be random, or it may be you may be taking samples which displays a similar characteristic to whatever you're trying to test. So this way you can learn enough about the end results to make further judgments, right? So that's what statistical sampling is. Okay, so now we're moving on to the tools and techniques of control quality, and we will be talking about the 7 quality tools. Okay, and these can be used to represent your data cause and effect diagram, which is known as the Ishikawa diagram, or the fishbone, or the YY. Am I right? YY?
And then also root cause analysis.
Oh yes, root cause analysis. I think this is a root cause analysis method in itself. I'm not sure if it qualifies directly as a root cause. Yeah. So let's look at like a problem, because that's what the cause and effect. You have the problem, which is at the head of the fish. Not motivated to sit or study for the PMP exam. That's the that's the major problem we have right now. So what could be the causes? Normally, when we have problems, the causes could be classified under these type of categories, like methods, materials, environments, and so on. But for our particular situation, we could think about, say, like the exam format or the work experience as well. So these are whatever you see outside the fish bones is the category. And the smaller bones is the subtopics of those categories. So when we talk about materials, we could be talking about, say, no access to the exam simulator. People might need to buy it, and that might be a problem. Or there are lots of sources to learn from online, so we don't know which source to follow. Like, for example, I just used the wrong source, apparently. So that's one of the things that happen, right? The environments, you might be studying very close to your bed and you fall asleep. Ever happen to you? Then? Happens to me all the time.
Every night.
Every night, right? Or the lack of study venue. Where do we go to study? I don't know, district? Yeah. So that's the environment. When we talk about the method, we just suck at sitting exams, or we don't know how to study. We don't know how to plan. So lack of planning, or we're probably trying to memorize the entire PMBOK and we feel that we're not ready yet, but we haven't gotten everything by memory. It might be a case where we just don't register, where we fail to make an exam, because that's a method in itself. If you register for the exam, then you're already motivated to study. Right, so it could be work experience. It could be a case where, in my case, I don't have that much work experience, so it might be hard for me to grasp the concepts of the PMI. Or if you're too experienced, then some people are too proud to learn new things. So it could be a case where you're too experienced to adapt to the new standards, the hip terms that PMBOK uses. Or it could be people. If you work for a crazy boss who wants you to stay late every time, then you won't have time to study. Or it could be just family obligations, or maybe your girlfriend problems, or I don't know, what's up. Yeah, it could be the exam format. It's a very intimidating exam. It could be just that you hate multiple choice exam questions, or you're just not very comfortable with the scenario based, because almost a lot of these questions are scenario based questions. And you have to sit the whole exam in 4 hours. It's a 200 question exam, so that's very tedious. So these things could be the determining factors of why people are not showing up, or why people are not determined to sit the exam, or not very serious about it. So that's the Ishikawa diagram. So that's a part of these 7 quality tools. The next quality tool is the flowchart. And let's go back to why we're not motivated, or let's stick to the exam, right? So the PMP version changed. It got postponed, as you know, to next year, I believe. Yeah. So when that happens, yeah, it got postponed. So what do? You watch TV, you play mobile games, and you use Facebook. And what do you do after that? You go back to check if the version is still postponed. Because if it is, then why not, right? Why bother, right? But if it's no longer postponed, then you gotta start working your ass off. And then you gotta sit the exam. And let's say you pass the exams. but next thing with the flow chart is that you need to remember that diamond shapes are like decision points, and these are where you arrive at the decision. So yeah, so after you pass the PMP exam, you might want to celebrate and go back to watching TV or whatever. But then I realized if you follow that process, you might have to take the exam again. So let's not watch TV after you celebrate because you don't want to sit the exam again when the version changes. But if you were, this is not you, if you were to fail, then you'd have to go back and check if the version has postponed. And if not, then you just go ahead and do that. But if it's postponed, you can go back to watching TV. So yeah, that's the second quality tools, which is the flow chart. The third one, check sheet. I talked about this earlier. Remember to differentiate your checklist and check sheet. Checklist, you already have your baseline stuff when you're going into the assessment session, looking to check to tick off what's being dealt with and what's not, as opposed to check sheets where you're tallying your scores of whatever defects you have or whatever you're doing right. So when I was doing the, let's say, my PMP, I didn't use a check sheet, but let's say if I did, I will have my 10 knowledge areas, and these will be like the amount of questions that I got wrong in the simulations. And this could help me to determine what my weakness is. So in this case, I suck at cost management because my total wrong is 33. And I'm not so bad at quality. So, you know, up to now, I think I only got one wrong. So that's a pretty promising part. And my strongest point will be risk management. But this is not very realistic, I realize. But, you know, just for the case of this scenario. Right, so we can also figure out what our percentages are. Well, Zinni, if you're getting these percentages, then you're definitely ready to ace the exam, right? But normally, this is more like what I used to get, around 70, right? So this check sheet will help you to make decisions as well. And that's why it's a part of the 7 quality tools. And your histogram, or easy way to remember, is your bar chart, because technically that's what it is. It's a bar chart. But some people argue that bar charts are like horizontal and this is vertical. But really, when you think about histogram, remember that histogram is a bar chart in its raw format. It's just as it is. You just think of the different scopes. According to PMP, integration starts first, scope, schedule, and then cost and quality. You're not rearranging them in terms of the highest to the lowest. That's another thing. So try not to get confused with that. That's just a histogram. It's a simple bar chart. And your control chart is where you're trying to control your process or your manufactured products to ensure that they're within acceptable ranges. And what type of ranges are we talking about? We're talking about the control limit. Control limit is set by your own standards to control the process in itself. So let's say we're trying to make the screws within like 3 to 5 centimeters. We need to ensure that they're all within this range here, according to our own process, right? So you can see that when it goes out of the control limits, whether it's the upper control or the lower control, that's called an out of control process. So it's now out of control. But, and the next thing is, outside of your control limit is your specification limit. And that's the limit set by the users, or I guess that's kind of like the contractual limit where the specifications are set. And this is definitely a no-no. The reason why you have your control limit is to ensure that you're monitoring this. And the upper specification limit is more like ensuring you're within the user's specification. So you see this point here, which is above and beyond the control limit and the specification limit, that will be out of the user's requirements. And another thing to remember is the 7. When you have like the rule of 7, when you have the 7 points to one side of the main line, oh yeah, I forgot to explain what a mean line is. When you have the 7 signs out of the mean line is really just an average line where you're like 5 to 7 of like 6.5, right? So when it's like consistently, when you have 7 points consistently on one side of the mean line, then that in itself is also an out of control. There's something fishy going on in that aspect. Right. So, okay. We talked about the histogram. The Pareto analysis it builds on the histogram. Pareto analysis uses the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule says that, okay, let's bring our histogram up. 80-20 says that 20% of the 80% of the defects arise from 20% of whatever we do, a fifth of whatever we do. So in this case, I think this does follow the Pareto analysis because you can see it's these first two are in the 80%, in the 20% region. If you look here, let's see. Yeah, quite how that was. 77. Oh yeah. Okay, here it is. 80%, right? This is 80% of the error. 80% of the error is a result of a fifth of the products. So when you look at the products, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you have 10 things that can go wrong. 10 reasons for being late. Alarm did not sound, could be traffic, you're too tired to get up, bad weather, you're too cold to work, or you have morning sickness, you drove to previous work, your brush got stuck in your hair, coffee was too hot, or least possible scenario, your car got stolen. But let's say these are the reasons for being late, right? So chances are, according to Pareto analysis, there are two things from this, which is the prevalent reason for being late most of the time. So when you have a problem, when you have a batch of problems, a fifth of that batch is responsible for a majority of the problems. Yeah, I think that's what Pareto talks about. So when you have, let's say, if you in here we have 10, right? But if you had 5, then one of the factors will be the determining causes of your problems. So it's always the 20% of something causes 80% of your entire problems. I hope that's clear. Is that clear?
It's clear. Basically, what you have in a Pareto analysis is an histogram that is order from major incidents to minor incident.
Right.
So what you need to do is to focus on the more important. So in this case, for example, you're saying that almost 80% of the time you're late is because of your alarm or because of the traffic. So those are the 2 things you need to focus on.
Right.
So it's basically about prioritizing the causes.
Right. So that's because we have 10. So 20% of 10 is 2. So 2 things are responsible. That's how I.
But the part of the 2 is not like the rule. The rule of what is important, it's what is causing the majority of the problems. So you focus on those. For example, in this case, you can say like, okay, I'm going to focus on the 3 that are more important: too tired to get out, traffic, and alarm, because that's almost 80% of the problems you're facing.
Oh, okay. So it's not that stringent on the whole 1/5 of everything thing?
No, it's basically of saying, if I need to start resolving my problem of being late, in this case, you will fix your alarm, which will solve 40% of your problem, but then also will work on the traffic, meaning that maybe you're going to be earlier.
Right.
Leaving to the office. So you're resolving those things, you are solving the majority of your problems.
Okay.
You will not start with a car gotten stolen, because only once that happened.
Yeah. I guess it's a way of prioritizing and focusing on the stronger defect areas.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. So yeah, this is called the vital few. These 2 areas will be your focus points. Okay. Now, on to the last one. Well, in my situation, it's the scatter diagram. And scatter diagram is really just plotting your points, dependable and independent, the points on the x-axis and y-axis, the independent and dependent variables. And then you have you run the, to see where, if it has a positive relationship or a negative relationship. So you can say that this chart here has positive relationship. For example, if you eat more food, you gain more weight. And yeah, the older you get, the wiser you are. And a bit more morbid, if you're more depressed, you're likely to commit suicide. So those are positive correlations. The negative will be more, I guess, inversely proportional. So the more you exercise, the more you lose weight or the less weight you have. The older you get, the less patient you become, or the less hair you have, I guess. And the more stressed you are, the lower your self-esteem will be. So these are like inversely proportional to each other. And no correlation is just these two elements, dependent and independent variable, just have no relationships with each other. So people say money can't buy happiness, or the temperature on Mars has no influence on the inflation rate. And the truth is not equal to how many people you convince. So this is an example of no correlations. All right, next thing we talk about probability. Probability is the chances of something happening or not happening. And the reason, the major focus that I found is the mutual exclusivity and the statistical independence. Mutual exclusivity pretty much says that two events cannot happen at the same time. So two things can't happen simultaneously. People tend to use dice to show an example, but I prefer coin. It seems simpler to me. If you flip a coin, you can't get heads and tails at the same time. Either you get heads or you get tails. But statistical independence is talking about if you flip 2 coins, the result of the first coin flip, if you get a heads on the first coin flip, that doesn't influence whether you get a heads or a tails on the second one. So I think this is easier to remember than the dice. Some people like to use cards, like the Queen of Hearts. But it sounds, for me, it's a bit more confusing. So I prefer to remember it this way. Yeah, so next we have variation. Variation, laws of variation says that everything varies. There is nothing, the two processes cannot be alike. And so it's obvious, if you want quality, you want to reduce your defects and you want to control your variations. So you want lesser variations. And the control charts are used to monitor and reduce this variation, which you require for better quality. So technically, this is the points, the running chart, if you will. And then you have your the points showing whether it's in control, it's out of control. But if in this scenario, this is a normal pause, this curve, which I forgot what it's called actually. But this is a normal curve, normal curvature right here. And yeah, so anything outside of here will be a variation. So total variation equals common cause variation plus special cause variation. So common cause variation will be like things which are happening normally. So like I've come here like for 2 days now, and we can always hear the noise and everything going on, but it's nothing special anymore because we're already used to it. The people are working in the background, but we don't mind anymore because it's become normal. So it's a common cause. It's a common cause. It's always present. It's predictable, right? And we cannot assign it to one thing. So we don't know who's making the noise or where what's coming from. But let's say somebody dropped a glass, then that becomes a special cause variation. If the glass breaks, that's going to make a sharp noise. And then that's going to be an assignable cause, and we don't know when that's going to happen. It's unpredictable. So that's the difference between common cause and special cause variation. And the next thing to remember is the common cause variation cannot be controlled because it's ongoing, right? If you don't like the noise, then we need to just get out of here and go home, right? But the special cause variation, it can be controlled. So just think of the example of the glass breaking. It's just an everyday normal occurrence thing, right? So I think that's, yeah. Oh, in this scenario, over here, yeah, you can see if you work in a construction site, and you're gonna hear a lot of noise every day. So, you know, there's nothing new there. And if we look over here, this is a thermometer. If you know your body temperature is normally at a certain range, but it's never at the specific range, it fluctuates, right? It goes up a bit more, it goes up a bit less. But if you got a flu or some kind of sickness, then the temperature might go up. Then you have a special cause variation, as opposed to before it was just a common cause variation because your body regulates temperature as needed. So I hope that's clear. Right, just to recap, I think we've dealt with all the tools and techniques. And if you remember the purpose of each process that plan quality management is used in planning to determine what quality, in what amounts you want when you want to check the quality. Manage quality is about the process, focus on the processes and how you're going to implement quality into the design, and how you're going to continuously improve your team's efficiency, or how you're going to eliminate the processes that are negatively affecting it or that are not very effective. And that we're talking about managed quality in that aspect. When you talk about the control quality, you always go to the end product, the end user, the product that the end user is going to be utilizing. So these are the three areas. And when you remember that, then if they ask for tools and techniques and ask you which tools and techniques should be used in what area, you should be able to remember it based on what you remember from the previous slide. Right? So that's pretty much it. I didn't write any of these. I just copy and pasted it from a lot of references, because when I was doing the thing, I didn't find like one source which was, you know, the fix. I had to refer to a lot of these. Sometimes some of these sources were very easy for certain topics, but sometimes they could be very complex for other topics, especially when it comes to procurement. You know, sometimes, I don't know, I think they're just trying to sell their program, and they want you to think that the exam is a lot harder than it is, just to sign up with them, to learn their thing. Yeah, so so that's why I didn't like to rely on one thing. If something seemed like it makes sense to me, then I will use it. But I hope I helped you guys out. Thanks for your inputs as well. So finally, yes, any questions?
No hard ones, come on.
That's okay, because I have a feeling I have a lot of professionals here. So I think I should be the one asking the questions over here. Yeah.
No, but first, a comment. I think you did a very good job with the presentation, A.
Oh, thank you, Oscar. Yeah.
Good job. I mean, it's very, very interesting presentation, and I'm sure it's going to be useful. And for the people listening these and listening these, and also that since we recorded, I think it will be a good for like a sample, but of how it could look like. But you did a great job producing the presentation.
All right, thanks, Oscar. Means a lot.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So, okay, I'm going to stop the sharing right now.